Maryland Senate candidates Angela Alsobrooks and Larry Hogan facing off in the first and only debate. The biggest topic, abortion. Alsobrooks criticized Hogan for vetoing a 2022 bill to expand reproductive health care in Maryland when he was governor. However, Hogan says that he supports abortion rights and did not sign the legislation.
We have the toughest gun laws in America. I made them stronger. I've always been for a universal background check. That was, the legislature was, playing games on that.
The more people hear about me, about my record, and about my positive vision for Maryland, we're earning votes every day.
Election day now just 24 days away. Well, Dr. Mileah Kromer is the director of UMBC's Institute of Politics. Dr. Kromer, welcome back to Capitol Review.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Kromer, why did you conduct this particular poll so close to the election?
Sure. Well, we were in the field that last week of September, so September 23rd to the 28th. Anytime we're in that nice post-Labor Day season, it's when more and more people start to pay attention to the election, more voters are engaged. And I think the importance of public polls like ours is it gives everyday voters and citizens a chance to sort of weigh in on the politics of the day. Now, keeping in mind, there are plenty of internal polls floating around that we don't ever get to see. So I think polls like ours and other public polls give an opportunity for us to see the inside sort of look that campaigns certainly get to see throughout the entire election.
You asked a question about the favorability of both parties. Was that statewide, or were you also asking their opinion of, the House and the Senate here in D.C., nationwide?
Yeah, so we asked favorability ratings of both the Democratic and Republican Party, and our sample is among Maryland adult voters and likely voters. And so what we found from those results, and I think this is certainly something that is playing a very key role in this Senate race, is that the Democratic Party is much more popular in the state than the Republican Party. Now, that makes a lot of sense given what we know about the Maryland electorate, which is heavily Democratic. More than half of the state's residents or state's voters are identified as Democrats, where only about a quarter of the voters are Republicans. And what you see in those numbers is exactly what we see nationwide. We have a really highly polarized electorate. Republicans like Republicans and Democrats like Democrats, and there is little in between and overlap.
You asked about Governor Moore's approval rating. Was that down party lines, you think?
Oh, yeah, there's certainly, underneath those numbers, there was certainly some party line, the same sort of polarization you see with other elected officials. He has a pretty solid favorability, approval rating overall at 54%. He's more has a higher approval rating than a disapproval rating, which is certainly where you want to be as a sitting governor. But when you look underneath those numbers, 80% of Democrats approve of the job he's doing. And I think it's no wonder then you've seen Governor Moore go out as a powerful surrogate for the Harris campaign, because he's just really well liked among Democrats.
What was your response about the direction of the state of Maryland? I'm kind of interested in that. Actually, I'm very interested.
Right. There's our right track, wrong direction numbers suggest that more Marylanders think the state is going down the right direction versus the wrong track. That's another good indicator for Governor Wes Moore. Probably the results from that release on Tuesday that folks were really interested in are the economic questions that suggested that the state really, that when people are asked to view the economic conditions of the state, they have a pretty negative view of how things have been going over the last year. And I think the key reason why is an overwhelming majority, almost everybody in Maryland, they say that it's the costs of goods and services, that grocery cost, that is really a huge concern to them. And anytime that economy right in front of you that you see every single day reminding you that it's more expensive to buy groceries now than it was before, you're going to have a negative view of the economy. Those are obviously kitchen table discussions. I wonder, though, your question about the size of government, what was that response? Is that a kitchen table topic? Well, it's a broader question about what folks want from their state government. A plurality of folks in Maryland say they'd like to see our state government sort of keep taxes the way they are now, keep government services the way they are now. A far fewer number of people would like to see more government services, even if it meant sort of raising taxes. And then some other folks, would like to see a reduction in government services. I think that it's important to note that Maryland as a state, we have a really robust state government that funds a lot of things. And so keeping things as they are now, I think is significant because we do a lot, the government does a lot for the citizens here in Maryland that perhaps some other states don't do.
It's interesting you said earlier that this poll kind of gives you a snapshot of the country as a whole. What is your overall assessment of the poll that you conducted?
Listen, I think the overall assessment is that Marylanders feel very much like the country does. Democrats are really looking forward to that election. They're hoping for some change. They continue to dislike former President Trump. The Democrats don't like the Republican Party. I think that is certainly trickling into the U.S. Senate race. But overall, overall voters and residents seem to like the job that Governor Moore is doing. They have positive feelings about the direction of the state. But I think it's really important for any elected official in Maryland to sort of consider that big takeaway issue that they are concerned about, the kitchen table economic issues.
I have to ask you last question, your overall thoughts about the Senate race between Hogan and Alsobrooks.
Great, thank you. So our poll, I think, was really similar to the poll that was conducted a week earlier by the Washington Post. Our poll finds that Angela Alsobrooks is currently leading that Senate race with 48% of the vote compared to Hogan's 39% of the vote. A lot of this has to do with the effective messaging of the Alsobrooks campaign. There has been a ton of ads sort of making sure that voters are thinking about the control of the Senate, which is something I think is a heavy messaging lift because everyday average voters typically don't think about sort of the institutional constructs of a legislative body when they're making their decisions. But this has been a consistent message, and it shows up in our poll time and time again. What's interesting, I think, though, is that both Alsobrooks and Hogan are still are pretty popular figures in the state. And so at the same time, Alsobrooks is leading. The former governor still has a strong favorability rating. The key thing for Hogan as he goes into the election in these waning weeks is he has to improve his numbers among Democrats. He has to appeal to those moderate to conservative Democrats that helped his reelection efforts in both 2014 and 2018.
Dr. Mileah Kromer, thank you very much for joining us.